What's up, babies? We've been doing this bitch for 140 days. Is that true? It better fucking be true. Why? Who knows? I don't give a flying fuck. I'm tired of shit. 140 days of this shit. 28th of ER 5786 Friday. May 15th. Are you done though? That would be my question. I'd be like, dog, you keep talking, but ain't nobody listening. Alright, so what did we do on the 10s, baby? Chabad. Listen to this one. I'm like that fucking horse. Push, perhaps. Are you? I'm whatever you want me to be, girl. Alright. Is this over? This is the worst. No one really knows for sure. Elevate, Elo Divrei, Elohim, Chaim, but this is the Missouri live by. What does that mean? It means whatever the fuck you want it to be, girl. Alright, calm down, babies. Creation of the world and shit. That's what they should just call it. Why? Whatever, gives a fuck. Why? Sucks. Wildest fight we've ever met. Good. I'm glad. Go fuck yourself. All right, here we go, folks.
Creation of heaven and earth.
Oh, this is the worst. Dog, not yet.
Minus 3,761.
Not yet, dog. Not yet. We gotta fucking do the thing. Oh, this is the worst. Really? Chabad. Timeline. Really? Dog, I don't even want to fucking talk right now. I just want to get this shit done. Why? Why not? So we've got 3761, creation of the world, birth of Adam and Eve, Chava. 3631, 130, Seth, son of Adam, was born. 3526, 235, Enosh, son of Seth, was born. 3436, 325, Kenan, son of Enosh, was born. 3366, 395, Mahalel, son of Kenan, was born. 3301, 460, Yared, son of Mahalel, was born. 3139, 622, Chanak, son of Yared, was born. Dog. And Adam's not even dead. He would have like so many fucking. He'd be like, "Oh, you're my great grandson." Oh man, hey grandpa, when are you gonna fucking eat it? And you're like, "Oh, you mean bite it? Yeah, whatever, dog. Same shit. Different day, is it? No, it's actually separate. This is the worst. All right, can you do the fucking thing with the thing? Yeah, dog. Everybody knows that. Here we go. Let's go. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kadeshanu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu al sefirat ha'omer. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. Today is 44 days, which is 6 weeks and 2 days of the Omer. May the merciful one restore unto us the service of the Beit HaMikdash speedily in our days. Amen. Salah. Are you done though? It's coffee and Kabbalah and coffee. Are you done? Did you get it? Dude, we just gotta check the day. But I've got this shit. Chabad Omer. Dude, you did the Omer count so fucking much. It's the worst. Who currently runs Chabad? There's somebody called Rabbi Rothschild. Do you own Chabad? I own everything, baby. I'm the best. Really? Fuck you. 44 days. Yeah, baby. I'm the best. All right, is that the end of your fucking story? I think so. Here we go, folks.
Of the world. Birth of Adam and Eve, Chava. Minus 3,631, 130 Seth, son of Adam, was born. Minus 3,526, 200 and son of Seth, was born. Minus 3,436, 320 of Enosh, was born. Minus 3,366, 395 Mehalel, son of Kenan, was born. Minus 3,460 Yer, son of Mehalel, was born. Minus 3,139, 622 Chanuk, son of Yer, was born. Minus 3,074, 687 Metushalach, son of Chanuk, was born. Minus 2,887, 874 Lemech II, son of Metushalach, was born. Minus 2,831, 930 Adam died. Minus 2,705, 1,056 Noah, son of Lemech II, was born. Minus 2225 1536 Noah began the construction of the ark. Minus 2205 1556 Japheth, son of Noah, was born. Minus 2204 1557 Cham, son of Noah, was born. Minus 2203 1558 Shem, son of Noah, was born. Minus 2105 1656 Metushelach died. Minus 2105 1656 The great flood covered the earth. Minus 2103 1658 Arpachshad, son of Shem, was born. Minus 2068 1693 Shalach, son of Arpachshad, born. Minus 2038 1723 Eber, son of Shalach, was born. Minus 2004 1757 Peleg, son of Eber, was born. Minus 1974 1787 Reu, son of Peleg, was born. Minus 1942 1819 Sirach, son of Reu, was born. Minus 1912 1849 Nocterai, son of Sirach, was born. Minus 1883 1878 Terah, son of Nocterai, was born. The forefathers. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1813 1948 Abraham, son of Terah, was born. Minus 1803 1958 Sarah, daughter of Haran, was born. Minus 1788 Abraham married Sarah. Minus 1765 1996 dispersion from Babel after building the tower. Minus 1761 2000 Terah left Ur Kasdim with his family. Minus 1755 2006 Noah died. Minus 1743 2018 The covenant, Brit Bain Habitarim, with Abraham. Minus 1738 2023 Abraham settled in Canaan. Minus 1727 2034 Ishmael, son of Abraham, was born. Minus 1713 2048 Abraham circumcised himself and Ishmael. Minus 1713 2048 Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. Minus 1713 2048 Isaac was born. Minus 1677 2084 The Acta, where Isaac was brought on the altar by Abraham. Minus 1677 2084 Sarah died. Minus 1653 2108 Jacob and Esau were born. Minus 1638 2123 Abraham died. Minus 1603 2158 Shem, son of Noah, died. Minus 1592 2171 Isaac blessed Jacob instead of Esau. Minus 1576 2185 Jacob went to Haran. Minus 1574 2187 Eber, great-grandson of Shem, died. Minus 1569 2192 Jacob married Leah and Rachel. Minus 1566 2195 Levi, son of Jacob and Leah, was born. Minus 1562 2199 Joseph, son of Jacob and Rachel, was born. Minus 1556 2205 Jacob left Haran. 1553 2208 Benjamin was born. 1545 2216 Joseph was sold. Minus 1533 2228 Isaac died. Minus 1532 2229 Joseph became viceroy of Egypt. Minus 1526 2235 Kahat, son of Levi, was born. Minus 1523 2238 Jacob, and his family, went to Egypt. Living in Egypt. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1506 2255 Jacob died. Minus 1429 2332 after Levi died. The enslavement in Egypt began. Minus 1003 2368 Moses was born. Minus 1355 2406 Joshua was born. Minus 1314 2447 Moses encountered the burning bush. Minus 1313 2448 The Jewish nation left Egypt, traveling through the desert. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1313 2448 The Jewish nation crossed the Red Sea. Minus 1313 2448 The revelation at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. Minus 1313 2448 Moses broke the tablets. Minus 1312 2449 Moshe came down Mount Sinai with the second tablets. Minus 1312 2449 The tabernacle was erected. Minus 1,312 2,449 The spies returned from Canaan with bad news. Minus 1,274 2,487 Aharon and Miriam died. Minus 1,273 2,488 Moses died. Judges and early prophets. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1,273 2,488 The Jews crossed the Jordan into Canaan. Minus 1,258 2,503 The appointment of the land of Israel was completed. Minus 1,245 2,516 Joshua died. Minus 1,228 2,533 The rule of judges began with Othniel ben Kenaz. Minus 1,188 2,573 Ehud ben Gera became leader. Minus 1,107 2,654 Shamgar ben Anath died. Minus 1,107 2,654 Deborah became leader. Minus 1,067 2,694 Gideon became leader. Minus 1,027 2,734 Abimelech, son of Gideon, became leader. Minus 1,024 2,737 Tola, son of Pua, became leader. Minus 1,003 2,758 Jair, the Jalidite, became leader. Minus 982 2,779 Jephthah, Hagil Adi, became leader. Minus 969 2,792 Elon, Hazabulonai, became leader. Minus 959 2,002 Ben Hillel became leader. Minus 51 2,810 Samson became leader. Minus 931 2,830 Eli the Cohen became leader. Minus 907 2,854 David was born. Minus 892,871 Samuel became leader. Kings and the First Holy Temple. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 879 2,882 Saul was appointed king. Minus 877 2,884 David became king of Judah in Hebron. Minus 869 2,892 David became king of Israel in Jerusalem. Minus 837 2,924 Solomon became king. Minus 833 2,928 The building of the first Beit Hamikdash commenced. Minus 827 2,935 The first Beit Hamikdash was completed. Minus 797 2,964 Solomon died and his kingdom was divided. Minus 797 2,964 Rehoboam, son of Solomon, became king of Judah. Minus 797 2,964 Jeroboam ben Nebat became king over Israel. Minus 718 3,043 Elijah went up in a chariot of fire. Minus 677 3,084 Joash renovated the Beit Hamikdash. Minus 619 3,142 Isaiah began his prophecies. Minus 574 3,187 The first 2 of the 10 tribes were exiled. Minus 566 3,195 Another 2 of the 10 tribes were exiled. Minus 562 3,199 Hezekiah became king of Judah. Minus 556 3,205 The last of the 10 tribes were exiled. Minus 548 3,213 Sennacherib invaded the land of Judah and retreated. Minus 533 3,228 Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, became king of Judah. Minus 463 3,298 Jeremiah began his prophecies. Minus 458 3,303 Josiah renovated the Beit Hamikdash. Minus 442 3,319 Jerusalem was conquered and Jehoiakim was exiled. 443,301 Joah the Book of Lamentations composed by Jeremiah. Minus 434 3,327 Jerusalem was conquered again and Jehoiakim was exiled. Minus 433,331 Jeremiah persisted in prophesying calamity. Minus 429 3,332 Ezekiel prophesied in exile. Minus 425 3,336 The final Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. Minus 23 3,338 The walls of Jerusalem were penetrated. Minus 423 3,338 The sacrifices ceased in the Beit Hamikdash. Minus 423 3,338 The first Beit Hamikdash was destroyed. Exile in Babylon. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 423 3,339 Gedaliah ben Achikam was killed. Minus 421 3,340 Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Minus 410 3,352 Ezekiel prophesied about the Beit Hamikdash. Minus 372 3,089 Daniel read the writing on the wall. Minus 372 3,389 Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. Minus 371 3,390 Zerubbabel led the return to the land of Israel. Minus 373,391 building of second Beit Hamikdash commenced. Then halted. Minus 366,395 Akashverosh II made his great banquet. Minus 362,399 Esther was taken to the palace. Minus 357,404 Esther took action against Haman's decree. Minus 355,406 Mordecai proclaimed the celebration of Purim. Minus 353,408 building of the second Beit Hamikdash resumed. Minus 349,412 the second Beit Hamikdash was completed. Building of the second Holy Temple. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 348,413 Ezra led the second return to the land of Israel. Minus 335,426 Nehemiah returned to rebuild walls of Jerusalem. Minus 313,448 Ezra died. Minus 313,448 Simon the Zodic met Alexander the Great. Minus 313,449 Dominion Shtaro began. Greek cultural domination. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 273,488 Simon the Zodic died. Minus 246,515 72 elders translated the Torah into Greek, Septuagint. Minus 143,621 the revolt of Mattatyahu the Shashmanai. Kingdom of Judea. Dynasty of the Shashmanaim. Secular year Jewish year event. Minus 139,622 Judah the Maccabee ruled. Minus 139,622 the second Beit Hamikdash was rededicated. Minus 138,623 Hanukkah was declared a festival. Minus 133,628 Judah the Maccabee was killed in battle. Minus 133,628 Yonatan, son of Mattatyahu, ruled. Minus 127,634 Shimon, son of Mattatyahu, ruled. Minus 119,642 Yohanan Harkanos, son of Shimon, ruled. Minus 93,668 Judah Aristobulus, son of Yochanan Harkanos, ruled. Minus 91,670 Alexander Yanai, son of Yochanan Harkanos, ruled. Minus 73,688 Queen Shalamzion, Salome Alexandra, wife of Alexander Yanai, ruled. Minus 65,696 Aristobulus II, son of Alexander Yanai, ruled/TD. Minus 61,3,700 the Romans gained control of Judea. Minus 61,3,700 Harkanos II, son of Alexander Yanai, ruled. Minus 43,721 Antigonus, son of Aristobulus II, ruled. Roman client kings and rulers, the Herodian dynasty. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 36,325 Herod I ruled. Killing all the Shashmanaim. 33,728 Hillel became the leader of the Torah scholars. Minus 19,3,742 Herod I began rebuilding the second Beit Hamikdash. Minus 11,3,750 renovation of the second Beit Hamikdash was completed. 13,761 Archelaus, son of Herod I, ruled. 3,768 Hillel died. 10,3,770 Archelaus was deposed by the Roman Emperor. 3,781 Agrippa I, grandson of Herod I, ruled. 3,788 the Sanhedrin moved from the second Beit Hamikdash. 3,804 Agrippa II, son of Agrippa I, ruled. 53,810 Rabban Gamliel I, son of Shimon, grandson of Hillel, died. 3,826 Vespasian arrived in Judea to reassert Roman authority. 3,829 the second Beit Hamikdash was destroyed. The Talmudic era. The Mishnah. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 3,834 Yohanan ben Zakkai died. 3,846 the Sanhedrin moved from place to place, under Gamliel II. 3,893 Bader fell, and the Bar Kokhba revolt ended in tragedy. 3,894 Judaism was banned, and Akiva was imprisoned. 3,949 Judah Hanasi completed the Mishnah around this time. The Talmudic era. The Gemara. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 219,979 Rav left the land of Israel and settled in Babylonia. 247,4007 Shmuel was the Talmudic authority in Babylonia. 254,4014 Yohanan was the leading Talmudic authority. 294,050 Huna was the leading Talmudic authority. 298,4058 Yehuda was the leading Talmudic authority. 304,060 Kista was the leading Talmudic authority. 309,4069 Rabba was the leading Talmudic authority. 321 4081 R. Yosef was the leading Talmudic authority. 325 4085 Abayi was the leading Talmudic authority. 338 4098 Rabbah was the leading Talmudic authority. 359 4119 Hillel II, who established the calendar, became Nasi. 392 4152 R. Ashi was the leading Talmudic authority. 427 4187 R. Ashi died after the compilation of the Gemara. 475 4235 The Talmud was complete when Ravina II died. The Rabbanan. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 551 4311 Mar Zutra proclaimed Jewish self-rule in Babylonia. The Janim. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 589 4349 The Talmudic Academy of Pumbedita was reconstituted. 609 4369 The Talmudic Academy of Sura was reconstituted. 614 4374 The Persians conquered the land of Israel. 614 4374 The Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. 629 4389 The Byzantine Empire reconquered the land of Israel. 636 4396 R. Itzhak was the last Jayon of Nehardeh, Virashuver. 637 4397 The Arabs conquered the land of Israel. 4405 One of the Takanat Hajanim was enacted at this time. 755 4515 Arakeh Jayon left Iraq for the land of Israel. 759 4519 Ar Yehuda became Jayon of Surah. 759 4519 Ahalachat Bidalat, B.A. Hag, was written at this time. 788 4548 Another of the Takanat Hajanim was enacted at this time. 858 4618 Aramrum, who wrote the Siddur, became Jayon of Surah. 928 4688 Rabbi Anusayadiyah was appointed Jayon of Surah. 955 4715 Four captives were ransomed at around this time. 968 4728 Ar Sherera became Jayon of Pumbedita. 997 4757 Ar Hai became, the last, Jayon of Pumbedita. 1038 4798 Ar Hai died. And the academies of Babylon declined. The early Rishonim, the Crusade massacres. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1044,800 Rabbi Anujersa Meir Hagolah died. 1088 4848 The Rif arrived in Spain from Morocco. 1096 4856 The Crusaders destroyed Jewish communities. 1099 4859 Jerusalem was captured by the Crusaders. 1103 4863 The Rif died. 1105 4865 Rashi died. And the era of the Tosafot began. 1135 4895 The Rambam, Maimonides, was born. 1144 4904 The first, recorded, blood libel took place. 1147 4907 The Crusaders attacked Jewish communities. 1100 4907 Rabbi Anutam was captured by the Crusaders. 1148 4908 The Rambams and the Radak's families left Cordova. 1165 4925 The Rambam visited the land of Israel. 1171 4931 Rabbi Anutam died. 1175 4935 The Rashbam died. 1184 4944 The young son of the Ri was killed. 1187 4948 Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. 1189 4949 Ar Yaakov d'Orleans was killed in London. 1190 4950 Jews were massacred in England in the Third Crusade. 1191 4951 Rabbi David Kimchi, known as the Radak, wrote his commentary. 1194 4954 The Ramban, Nachmanides, was born. 1198 4959 The Aryabid died. 1204 4965 The Rambam died. 1236 4996 Rampaging mobs massacred Jews in France. 1242 5002 A massive burning of the Talmud took place in Paris. 1244 5004 Jerusalem was sacked by Egyptians and Turks. 1252 5012 The Inquisition began to use torture. 1267 5027 The Ramban left Spain and settled in the land of Israel. 1275 1030 The Ramban died. 1286 5046 The Maher Amir Rothenberg was imprisoned. 1295 1050 New works advanced the study of Kabbalah. 1,295,050. The era of the Tosafot concluded at around this time. Later Rishonim. Persecutions and expulsions. Segment in history. 1,295,050. All Jews were expelled from England. 1,293,5,053. The Maher Amir Rothenberg died in prison. 1,298,5,058. The Rheinfleisch massacres began. 1,298,5,058. The author of the Mordecai and Haggahat Maimoniyot were killed. 1,305,5,065. The Rashba placed a limited ban on philosophy. 1,305,5,065. The Rosh and his son, the Tur. 1,305,066. All Jews expelled. 1,310,5,070. The Rashba died. 1,325,080 Jews were massacred by the Posteros Crusaders. 1,327,5,088. The Rosh died. 1,386,5,096 Jews of Germany were massacred by the armed letter bands. 1,338,5,098. The Ralbag wrote his commentary on the Bible. 1,349,5,109. The Black Death massacres swept across Europe. 1,367,5,127. The Ran, Reibisch, and other scholars in Spain were imprisoned. 1,391,5,151 Jews of Spain were massacred. Many were forced to convert. 1,391,5,151. The Reibisch and Rashbats left Spain. 1,394,5,155. The final expulsion of Jews from France. 1,413,5,173. R. Yosef Albo was in a forced debate with Christians. 1,421,5,181 Jews in Austria were massacred in the Wiener Gezira. 188,5,248. R. Obadiah de Bertinora settled in Jerusalem. 1,491,5,251. Columbus consulted R. Abraham Zacuto for his travels. 1,492,5,252. All Jews were expelled from Spain and Sicily. The great scholars of the Shulchan Aruch and Torah Consolidation. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1,493 5,253. R. Itzhak Abarbanel arrived in Naples from Spain. 1,496 5,257. All Jews were expelled from Portugal. 1,516 5,276. The Ein Yaakov was printed. 1,516 5,276. The Turks, Ottoman Empire, conquered Eretz Yisrael. 1,525 5,285. R. Yosef Yasselman saved many Jews during the Peasants' War. 1,553 5,314. A mass burning of Jewish books took place in Rome. 1,563 5,323. The Shulchan Aruch was completed by R. Yosef Karo. 1,575,330. The Shulchan Aruch was published with supplements of Rama. 1,572 5,332. The Arizal died in Tzfat. 1,573 5,333. The Maharal came to Prague. 1,573 5,334. The Maharshal died. 1,575 5,335. R. Yosef Karo died in Safat. 1,599 5,359. The Maharal returned to Prague again. 1,614 5,374. The Maharsha became rabbi in Lublin. 1,616 5,377. The Tosafot Yom Tov commentary was concluded. 1,621 5,382. The Shalom arrived in the land of Israel. 1,629 5,389. R. Yom Tov Lipman Heller was imprisoned in Prague. 1,645,400. R. Yoel Sirks, the Bach, died. 1,646 5,406. The Shach and Taz, on Shulchan Aruch, were printed. 1,648 5,408 Jews were massacred by Shmuel Maki's forces. Early Akaranim and East European massacres. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1,654 5,414. The first Jews settled in New Amsterdam, New York. 1,655 5,415. Many Jews killed in Russian and Swedish invasions of Poland. 1,656 5,416 Jews were permitted to live in England. 1,656 5,416 Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated. 1,673 5,433 The Magen Avraham, on Shulchan Aruch, was completed. 1,676 5,437 Shabtai Tzvi died as a Muslim. 1,689 5,449 The Beit Shmuel, on the Shulchan Aruch, was printed. 1098 5458 The Baal Shem Tov was born. 1702 5463 The Nia Yahushua's family was killed in an explosion. 1712 5472 The Siptei Chachamim was arrested. 1724 5484 Ardot Yaakov Kulai, Miam Loizi, arrived in Constantinople. 1727 5487 The Mishnah Elimelech died. 1734 5494 Jews were massacred by the Haidamach bands. Akaranim and early Hasidim. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1741 5501 Igor Hashayim arrived in the land of Israel. 1747 5507 Ar Moshe Haim Luzito, Runkle, died in Akko, Acre. 1755 5510 Ar Jonathan Beskutz became rabbi in Hamburg. 1754 5515 Ar Yechezkel Landau, known as the Noda by Yehuda, became rabbi in Prague. 1757 5518 The Frankists instigated mass burnings of the Talmud. 1759 5519 Frankists supported blood libel charges in public debate. 1765 5520 The Baal Shem Tov died. 1764 5524 The Council of Four Lands, known as the Bayat Arba Ritzot, was discontinued. 1768 5528 Despite resistance, the Haidamachs massacred thousands. 1772 5532 The Maggid of Mazuritz died. 1782 5542 R. N. Adler and Chatham Sofer visited the Noda by Yehuda. 1786 5546 R. Elimelech of Lizensk died. 1791 5551 The Pale of Settlement was established in Russia. 1793 5553 Jews suffered in Reign of Terror of French Revolution. 1797 5558 The Vilna Gaon died. 1798 5559 The Bal Hahanya was released from first imprisonment. 1799 5559 Napoleon led an army expedition through died. 1800 566 The Chatham Sofer became rabbi in Pressburg. 1809 5570 R. Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev died. 1810 5571 R. Nachman of Breslov died. 1814 5574 R. Akiva Eger became rabbi in Posen. 1814 5575 Koznetzer Maggid and Yehudi of Peshiska. Both died. 1815 5575 Joseph of Lublin and R. Mendel of Rimanov both died. 1819 5579 Anti-Jewish riots spread throughout Germany. 1827 5587 Russia began conscripting Jewish children to the army. 1845 600 R. Yisrael of Ruzin was released from imprisonment. Later Akaranim and the Changing Society. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1843 5603 The Tzemach Tzedek of Lubavitch was repeatedly arrested in Russia. 1846 5606 Sir Moshe Montefiore visited Russia to help local Jews. 1848 5609 R. Yisrael Salander left Vilna. 1851 5611 R. Shimshon Raphael Hirsch became rabbi in Frankfurt am Main. 1859 5619 R. Menachem Mendel of Kotsk died. 1864 5624 The Malbim was imprisoned, and then expelled from Romania. 1866 5626 Judashe Haram, Tiferet Shlomo, and Tzemach Tzedek died. 1873 5633 The Chafetz Haim was published. 1874 5634 The Minchat Chinuch died. 1878 5638 Petatikva agricultural settlement was established. 5641 Many Jews began leaving Russia after a wave of pogroms. 1886 5646 R. Shlomo Gans Fried, author of Keetzer Shulchan Aruch, died. 1892 5652 R. Haim, Brisker, came rabbi in Brisk. 1905 5665 The Sfat Emet died. 1905 5665 Many Jews were killed in official Russian pogroms. 1911 5671 Chazanish was published. 1914 5674 Over 500,000 Jewish soldiers fought in World War I. 1918 5678 Over 60,000 Jews were killed during the Russian Revolution. 1923 5684 The Daf Hayomi study cycle commenced. 1927 5687 The sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe was released from Soviet prison. 1938 5699 Jews were attacked in the Kristallnacht pogroms in Germany. The Holocaust. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1939 5699 Germany started World War II. And mass killing of Jews. 1941 5701 Nazi Germany unexpectedly invaded Russia. 1941 5701 200,000 Jews were killed at Babi Yar and Ponary. 1942 5702 400,000 Jews of Warsaw were sent to death camps. 1943 5703 Nazi Germany experienced massive losses in the Battle of Stalingrad. 1943 5703 The remaining Jews in Warsaw staged a massive uprising. 1943 5703 Jewish uprisings at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Bialystok. 1943 5703 93% of their Jews to safety. 1944 5704 300,000 Hungarian Jews were killed. 1944 5705 uprising in Auschwitz death camp just before freedom. 1945 5705 World War II ended. 1945 5705 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis during the war. The modern state of Israel. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1947 5707 publication of the Talmud Encyclopedia was commenced. 1947 5708 The United Nations divided Israel. 1947 5708 Arabs attacked Israel to gain territory. 1948 5708 The State of Israel was established. 1948 5708 Israel was invaded by many Arab countries. 1949 5709 The War of Independence in Israel ended. 1955 5710 All Jews left the ancient Jewish community of Iraq. 1955 5710 Almost all Jews of Yemen emigrated to Israel. 1951 5711 The Lubavitcher Rebbe accepts the mantle of leadership. 1956 5717 Jewish forces invaded Egypt and conquered the Sinai Desert. 1967 5727 The Lubavitcher Rebbe established the Tefillin campaign. 1967 5727 Jerusalem reunited under Jewish rule in the Six-Day War. 1973 5734 2,500 Jewish soldiers were killed in the Yom Kippur War. 1974 5734 The Lubavitcher Rebbe established the Shabbat Candle campaign. 1982 5742 massive enemy arsenals were discovered in Lebanon. 1987 5746 The first international conference of Chabad Lubavitch emissaries. 1993 5753 A secret agreement signed in Oslo. 1994 5754 The Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away. 2008 5767 Deadly terrorist attack at the Chabad house in Mumbai, India, kill 6. 2020 5780 Israel signed Abraham Accords, normalizing relations with UAE and Bahrain, soon followed by Sudan and Morocco.
Story happened where a guy goes to Europe, he rents a house, rents a zimmer, and he gets there and there are no mezuzahs on the door. So he's furious, and he looks last minute, asks around, and he gets a place for Shabbos. Last time is released, he got a place for last minute. And Moshe Shabbos refuses to pay the first guy. So he gave me a place, got a mezuzah for him. Does he have a pint or not? Here's the trick. Let me tell you the story again. We rented a zimmer. Oh, for Shabbos. We rented a zimmer. Zimmer is like all that. It's not $5 million mezuzah. No, tell him he doesn't need a lock in the door. He doesn't need a lock in the door. Let's see.
Oh, that's good.
We're holding 5 lines from the top of people who have He's familiar with the approach of the Gemara. So here's the 100 brothers. Say Benchmark, in the morning, outside. Are you ready? And then 16 degrees of shot. So
I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel and to the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means, but only should serve as a springboard for deeper study and reflection. And hopefully it will also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tchia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, an Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics in esotericism, and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism and hermetic philosophy by joining my Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's enter the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. All right, folks. Well, welcome back to this sort of traveling, let's call it a circus. 3-ring, 5-ring circus? I don't know. 5-ring circus. That's a pretty cool group here. Let's get back into this, and let's start by just, again, as we try to do every time, let's just recap a little bit so we're on the same page. And that page, of course, here on the left is a picture from Sefer Raziel HaMalach, one of the most famous books of Jewish magic ever written. You're seeing two different hamayot, either amulets or various kinds of things written in angelic language. So if you ever want to know what the language of the angels looks like, those are two examples of angelic language being written out there. Now, what they say, I have no idea. You have to ask the angels. I don't know, you can write Michael at olamhabad.gov, and maybe he'll write you back. Doesn't seem to write me back. What we noticed last time about Jewish magic, and we did sort of a big romp through Jewish magic, is that Judaism and magic have had a very complicated, very long relationship. And I say very long relationship because, as I pointed out last time, the earliest document we have of the Torah is a magical amulet recovered from Jerusalem and the Ketipidon tombs there, and written on silver, and you can see it in the Israel Museum. So the very first documents we have of the Bible are magical amulets, probably. So if you want to say that Jews don't do magic, well, they must not do Torah too. So it's a non-starter. So they've had this very complicated, very tortured history of magic, where on the one hand, it's very clear that the Bible, and the people that wrote the Hebrew Bible, have a very uncomfortable relationship with magical practice and theological reasons obviously included here, right? The idea that you can affect supernatural causation. If you can affect supernatural causation, then who needs a God? It kind of makes God redundant, right? God becomes like a thing that you really don't need. If you can like make it rain, you can make yourself fall in love with people, or make people fall in love with you, or make pennies from heaven. Who needs a God when they can win the lottery on their own through magic? And at the same time, right, we see that Jewish magic is resisted all through the centuries. We see it again all the way back to Ketef Hinnom and all the way down through now. And as I pointed out, right, when I say all the way down through now, my bottom point really obtains here. In the Haredi community, in the community of ultra-Orthodox Jews, we see magical manuals still being published to this day. And also, of course, in the liberal Jewish world, there's an entire world of practicing Jewish witches and other folks who identify as Kohenites, who are also very interested in things like astrology and magical practices. And so we see that that Jewish magic has really thrived down through the ages. And unsurprisingly, it's mirrored local magical traditions. So we see that Jewish magic often looks a lot like the magic of the area that they're living in. So we see the same kinds of magic in the Greco-Egyptian period. We see Jewish magic being practiced in the Babylonian context with those cool incantation bowls. And then as we move through the Roman period and again the European period, we're going to see that Jewish magic will often borrow from the local cultures, but also influence those cultures as well. And that would be especially true in the European context, where Jewish magic has had a disproportionate impact on the development of European magic. That's why if you ever see those magical squares, most books of magic, European non-Jewish books of magic, there's some Hebrew there, right? Well, it's not because they like Jews. They were perfectly happy to see Jews sent to whatever dreadful fate they were sent to. But they did admit the Jews had secret powers, magical powers, and they were perfectly happy to use them. As we saw, Jewish magic ran the gamut, right? It ran the gamut from curses, because everybody gets salty, right? Yeah, cursing people's like your thing, right? Divination, who doesn't want to know the future? Love magic, because who wants to go to sleep alone? But, again, we should be careful, right? Love magic, consent is a value we have around. And, of course, love magic isn't about consent. We have grimoires, which are medieval Jewish spell books that contain a wide range of Jewish magical experiments. In fact, in medieval times, Al, you'll appreciate this, that the word experiment actually derives itself from the medieval Latin word for experimenta, which were magical spells. So the word experiment actually has its origin in the technical word for a magical operation. And the word experiment actually comes from that. So if you look at medieval magical manuals, they'll say an experiment for invisibility. And what's interesting, right, is that those invisibility spells would be tinkered with to try to make them work better or work at all. And so when modern science, that so-called new science came along, they just adopted that language. And so it's interesting to see that, again, the boundary between magic and science early on is pretty vague sometimes. So we also see amulets, right? Amulets are devices used to call various kinds of, either to receive positive energy, perhaps from the stars, stellar influence, or repulse bad energy in the form of things like demons, shadim. So we see amulets. Astrological magic is also very popular. Sefer Rabbi Hamala, the book you're looking at now on the screen, was a big part of angel magic, astrological magic. We have demon capturing bowls. We have the creation of living beings. We'll talk a lot about that tonight as we get into Sefer Yetzirah. The golem is probably the Jewish monster par excellence. I imagine most folks here have heard of the golem. Of course, that myth comes from the Sefer Yetzirah, which we'll talk about this evening at length. Of course, we also have angel summoning and the whole thing. So Jewish magic really ran the gamut. So again, what I really want to drive home about the process of Jewish magic is what I said last time, is that people who want to tell you that magic isn't Jewish and there's no such thing as Jewish magic, well, they got some archaeology to talk to, right? That's my basic argument. You can say that this is not a thing and that's not a thing. You can say it's not acceptable in your community, fine. But to tell me that Jews didn't do it for 3,000 years, you're just badly informed. I don't know what else to tell you. The scientific, archaeological, paleographic data tells me that you're wrong. And if you want to just sort of put your fingers in the air and go la 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 la, Jews didn't do this, well, have fun being wrong, because it's very clear the Jews did. So, now again, whether your community accepts it, whether they'll go to Oak Park over there, and whether they are okay with it, or Borough Park, or go to Crown Heights and see if they practice magic, I don't know. But probably, again, Menachem down the street. He's up 12 in the middle of the night doing some weird stuff. He might be up to some magic, right? And he wouldn't be that weird. And if you think about this from a historical perspective, but the fact that there are magicians, sorcerers operating in Jewish communities all over the world through history, any community that doesn't have one is probably the weirdo community. That's probably the weirdo community. The one that doesn't have one, right? The much more likely outcome is two. So Jewish magic has been here. It will be here. It's not going to go away. And by the way, this is true of magic in general. Magic is more popular now than ever before. Right, so for better or worse, it's so tonight we're gonna do it, folks. We're gonna get into the very first vestiges, the very first layer stratum of the Kabbalah. So we're gonna do it. We're talking about this distinction between Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. We're not gonna hit that. We're gonna begin to get into the world of Kabbalah. But to do that, we have to introduce things a little bit from a philosophical angle. And that's because while people often think of Kabbalah as a kind of mysticism, and people think of mysticism as somehow opposed to science or opposed to philosophy, those kinds of oppositions just did not exist in the late classical world, and they certainly didn't exist in the Middle Ages. So we have to loosen up our categories a little bit here, right? Because we often think of these things existing in opposites, right? Science doesn't like mysticism doesn't like philosophy and science can't really get along. And so they're all fighting, and this is the way this is our world, right? It's not theirs. Their world is a much different world than ours. And the first thing you have to do is kind of, take your modernity hat off and put a different hat on, whatever that hat is, wig or whatever. And so we have to understand that in the late classical world, the relationship between philosophy, mysticism, magic, religion was very complicated and very mixed together, right? So drawing a line between one of these and the other of these is just really not possible. And so what we have to understand is that Judaism has always had a very weird relationship with the outside world. Always very weird relationship, right? Because on the one hand, Jews want to maintain their cultural, religious distinctiveness. And on the other hand, well, the outside world's kind of cool. They got Greek science, and they got like TV, and they got Xbox, and all this stuff, right? So there's all kinds of things about the outside world that Jews want to admit is cool, and yet at the same time, we don't want to eat the bad A word. You know what the bad A word is? Assimilate. Assimilate, right? This is the bad A word, right? So there's this idea that Jews do not want to assimilate, but they always have to some degree. And even when they don't, that non-assimilation is actually a response to assimilation, right? You're never outside that logic. So deal with the relationship between ancient, late classical Jews and Greek science. Because the Greeks had a lot of stuff figured out, folks. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, whether they were right or not, and I don't think they were. The Greek model of the world was a far better model of the world. It explained, at least at some level, why the planets did what they did, right? Greek science, Greek math, right? When you see it, I don't know if folks here have ever done a geometry class, right? But when you prove to yourself that Pythagorean theorem is true, it's magical. It's magical. When you see mathematical proof of something, you're like, damn, that's really true. That's for real true. Not like I made it up, like I had a fever dream about it being true, whatever. That's true, and it can't be otherwise. The Greeks pioneered a lot of this stuff. Now, it's not to say the Greeks invented everything, right? The Pythagorean theorem has been known by the Babylonians in the form of what are called Pythagorean triplets well before Pythagoras, right? Pythagoras leaned heavily on the Egyptians for a lot of his mathematical knowledge. As you might imagine, the Egyptians knew a thing or two about triangles. So, again, the Greeks had things going on, right? And the Greeks were the big pioneers in what we might now recognize as something like empirical science or theoretical science. Now, what's really important about this is, right, Jews have always had a sort of touch-pull relationship with Greek signs. But what increasingly begins to happen is that Jewish philosophy begins to be deeply influenced by two distinct forms of Greek philosophy. Now, these two forms of Greek philosophy, we have names for them now, right? We call them Neo-Pythagoreanism and Neoplatonism. Now, I'm going to do a lot more with Neoplatonism next time when we get into Kabbalah proper. But tonight, what I really want to focus on is a school of Greek philosophy that we now call Neo-Pythagoreanism. Now, you can imagine how many Greeks called their philosophy Neo-Pythagoreanism. The answer is exactly zero. No Greeks called their school that, right? Everyone just thought they were being philosophers. But there are two things that are really important about what we now call Neo-Pythagoreanism, right? And don't be put off by the name. It's just one of these $4 words that make philosophers sound smart. Basically, what we're talking about here is two things. One thing we're talking about here is the influence of Pythagorean philosophy. And Pythagorean philosophy is the same philosophy that any string theorist probably will believe in today, and that is the world is fundamentally mathematical, right? Not describable in terms of math, but math. The world is mathematical, right? And so that's the main thing, right? That the structure of reality, the fundamental structure of reality is mathematical in nature. Again, this idea probably is more popular now in some forms of contemporary physics than it ever has been. The second thing that's worth noting about this is that for the Neo-Pythagoreans, the union with God was possible. One could be like God, right? God, singular God, right? Because the Pythagoreans are all about like everything going back to one, right? And so they really thought that fundamentally things were basically one. And so the idea was you could be like that too. You could unite your consciousness, you could unite your being, you could unite your nous with the divine. And as you can imagine, those two ideas are going to be part and parcel of a great deal of what becomes mysticism in the ancient world and, of course, in the modern world as well. By the way, the image you're seeing on the screen here is an image from a Pythagorean or Neo-Pythagorean basilica that was actually discovered in the 18th century in Rome. It's recently been reopened. I've always wanted to go there. It's perfectly preserved. This is where Neo-Pythagoreans hung out in Rome. It's basically completely preserved. It was only discovered on accident. And so it's really neat that you can go into these places where these guys are like hanging out, talking about numbers and stuff. And it's actually preserved in Rome. I feel a very small amount to go in there. So next time I go to Rome, I'm going to try to be one of those very small group of people. So let's combine that, right? Let's think of this idea with some ideas from Judaism. Now, Judaism, as you probably know from the book of Genesis in the Bible, Bereshit, that the way that God makes the world in Jewish lore and Jewish mythology and Israelite mythology is that God speaks the world into being. That the existence is a speech act, right? God says, Yehi or, let there be light, and Vayehi or, there was light. The very act of speech causes this being to come into existence. And thus, right, if God speaks Hebrew, which of course Israelites thought, Jews think that God does, that's the language of God. In fact, that's what we call Hebrew, Lashon Kodesh, right, Lashon Kodesh, that it is holy language. Then the very reality of Hebrew is that Hebrew itself has magical power. It's the case that the language itself is special. It's metaphysically powerful. It's quasi-divine. Because if God speaks it, then it can't be just a bunch of random sounds, right? We make random sounds, dog, right, or whatever, right? We think of sounds as being random, but God's speech isn't random. God's speech is the opposite of random. It's ordering. Because in the ancient Israelite imagination, remember back from the first talk, that part of what goes on in the ancient Israelite mind worldview is that God is ordering the world out of chaos. For the ancient Israelites, it's chaos versus order. So what does God's speech do? It orders the universe. And this is unsurprising, right? Because grammar, if you've ever studied some grammar, if you've been tortured by some grammar, you know the thing that's torturous about grammar is that it's orderly. And that's what's hard about it. It's about learning the patterns, learning when there's exceptions to the patterns, and why there are exceptions to the patterns. It's orderly. And so language as an act of order is how God created the world. There was nothing, tohu bohu, chaos, and then God spoke, and it ordered it. So Hebrew has this kind of power. You see this very early on in Israelite, you might call it linguistics or ontology or metaphysical, the metaphysics of language. But there are two ways in which this plays itself out. The first, of course, is that language is magical. This is unsurprising, right? If you imagine a sorcerer, the one thing every child knows about what sorcerers say, right, is abracadabra. Well, you might think that's just nonsense gibberish, but it's not. It's Aramaic. Abracadabra literally means in Aramaic something like, I create as I speak. Now, think about that for a minute, right? Abracadabra, I create as I speak. Well, if a magician is uttering that, who are they imitating? God. Because God creates speech. So, on the one hand, we have language is magical. You can do magic with language. We've already seen that with Hebrew being used in all its magical practices. But if you can speak that magical language, it's not just that you can do magical powers. You have magical powers. You're also imitatio Dei, imitating God. You're being as if a God, right? Because God can do it through language. Well, if God speaks that language and you speak that language, you are kind of being quasi-divine. And so, insofar as one can speak that language and conjure things into being, you can imitate God, but also you can become unified with God. Because in the same way that God creates through speech, you create through speech, you are imitating and being like God. This is the theological equivalent of fake it till you make it. Right, folks? This is you becoming united with God by acting like God. And by acting like God, one becomes unified with God. So you can see how this circuit is being closed, right? And how the role of Hebrew in Israelite theology and the role of Hebrew in the action of doing sort of mystical stuff, right, allows one to engage in this mystically powerful language. The image here to the left that you're seeing is from Abraham Abulafia, founder of the prophetic Kabbalah, who we'll get to in a couple of weeks. These are meditation wheels by which one can, in fact, change one's consciousness by, and by changing one's consciousness, I mean, elevate one's consciousness to be unified with God via prophecy by meditating on specific words in the Hebrew alphabet. It's from a manuscript of Abraham Abulafia, not written by him, but of one of his texts. We'll get to him in a couple of weeks. The first time we see this idea of imitating God by using language to create things is in the Babylonian Talmud. And this gets back to Al's point, right, where Al commented that on the one hand we have the rabbis and everyone else. Well, here's where I want to disrupt that, because in the Babylonian Talmud we have the rabbis doing the exact same, the thing that you said they didn't do, right? You wanted to draw a line. And here's where I'm saying the line can't be drawn. So we have in the Babylonian Talmud in two different stories, which are probably mirroring each other, but being told by two different rabbis, in Tractate Sanhedrin, where we have both Abiah and Rabbah, two very prominent rabbis, discussing death penalty cases, right? The Tractate Sanhedrin, as you may know from Babylonian Talmud, is all about death penalty cases. And one of the things that is a death penalty case is sorcery. You're not allowed to practice sorcery. And so what is constitutive of sorcery, right? So they say there's all kinds of things that are constitutive of sorcery, right? Well, creating illusions isn't. You're allowed to create illusions. This is the rabbinical idea that you can do stage magic. In fact, Yishuv, I think in modern Hebrew, actually indicates stage magic. Right? What is allowed? This is positively mind-boggling. Right? Such was formed by Rabbi Athena and Rabbi Shaya, who spent every Shabbos Eve in studying Hilchot Yetzirah. We'll talk about what this is in just a minute. By means of which they created a third-grown calf and ate it. So they studied Hilchot Yetzirah, right? This literally means the doing of the Yetzirah, right? So if you want to have a book about the laws, like Hilchot Shabbat is how to practice Shabbat. It's the laws of Shabbat. Hilchot Yetzirah is the laws of formation. How you make something. Well, what did they do? They studied it, and on the eve of Erev Shabbos, on the Shabbat Eve, they created a third-grown calf and they ate it for Shabbat. They made a calf. They made one. Rabbah said, and this is even more dramatic, Rabbah said that if the righteous desired, they could create a world. Now, this translation is hiding something. This is a translation from Sepharia, but the actual translation in the Aramaic says they could create a world, just like God. They could create an olam. Now, that is positively mind-blowing. That if you were righteous, you could create a world, right? But you have inequities, so you can't. Now, Rabbah created a man, right, and sent him to Rabbi Zerah. And Rabbi Zerah said to him, right, spoke to him and said, he received no answer, right? He was mute. And thereupon he said, you're a creature of the magicians. Actually, in Hebrew, or Aramaic rather, it says, you're one of the company, right? Like, you're one of those guys, right? It's in Hebrew and Aramaic. It says, go back to the dust, right? And Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Shah said, also spent studying Sefer Yetzirah, by means of which they created the third row path. So in the Babylonian Talmud, again, the central work of rabbinical Judaism, there is no more important book of rabbinical Judaism than Babylonian Talmud. We have rabbis making people, making calves. So the distinction between what's magic and what's orthodox at this point has to be completely breaking down. Because I don't know about you, if I made a person right from dust and then sent them to you, you're going to be like, well, if it ain't magic, the magic gets here, damn. Like, again, making people ain't magic, I don't know what it is. So what we have about Babylonian Talmud is the idea that somehow they're studying some book, some text, and creating people. Now again, the person's mute. There's no doubt about the fact that it's not a perfect person. They're mute, right? Which would have been thought of as a disability in the ancient world. Again, ancient ableism aside. What we have here is an image of creation by some kind of study. Further at Baruch 55 pace, we have the idea that Bezalel was chosen by God to be the architect of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Why? Because Bezalel, and I have the story not because my Hebrew name is Bezalel, but because it's a great story, but because Bezalel knew how to join the letters by which heaven and earth were created. So again, listen to that in the Babylonian Talmud at Baruch 55 base, that Bezalel was chosen because he understood how to combine the letters by which heaven and earth were created. So already by the Talmud, we have the idea that the heavens and the earth were created, the Olam, the cosmos were created by the combination of letters. And here again at Tractate Sanhedrin 67-65 base, we have the idea that you create if you are righteous. If you are righteous. I'm not that righteous, thank God. Now, what's this text? Right, what's this text? Sefer Yetzirah is, without a doubt, the most enigmatic and important book of Jewish mysticism prior to the Kabbalah. There is no more important book prior to the rise of the Kabbalah in terms of Jewish mysticism than Sefer Yetzirah. I'll go on to say also later, Sefer Yetzirah is canonical. It's scripture now. In the Orthodox world, you can make arguments based on it. It is a kind of Jewish scripture. We're not like the Christians. The Christian canon is basically closed. The Muslim canon is definitely closed, right? The Jewish canon kind of is open. Stuff gets in, right? And from community to community, right? Things get in. And Sefer Yetzirah has certainly got in. I would consider it to be part of the Jewish canon, right along with the Bible and with the Babylonian Talmud and the Sefer Zohar, etc. What is it? What is the Sefer Yetzirah? It is a text produced sometime between 500 and 1,000 of the Common Era. It's very brief. It's only about 2,000 words long, and it's a speculative text describing the method by which God created the cosmos, or the Olam. I'm going to use the word Olam because I prefer to use cosmos. I think it has connotations that are a little bit maybe too modern. And when I say Olam would include all of the physical world we now know of, described by the standard model of particle physics with 25 particles, 4 forces. But the Olam is a much bigger angle about what that would include angels and demons and all kinds of cool stuff. So at any rate, the Sefer Yetzirah describes in very, very brief words, right? They're only about 2,000 words on an average recension. We can talk about recensions later. There are 3 or 4 different recensions of the Sefer Yetzirah that have come down to us. There's a debate about how they came down to us. But what we have is a book describing how the world was created, attributed to none less than the patriarch Abraham. Why Abraham? Because there is a line in Genesis where it said Abraham made souls, right? That Abraham created souls. And the idea is that because Abraham could create souls, the only way he could have done that is if he had access to Sefer Yetzirah, and therefore that is proof for the traditional community at least that because Abraham could create souls, that he was also in command of the Sefer Yetzirah. Now, when was this book written down? The shorter answer is we have no idea. We just don't know. Sometime before 1000 of the Common Era, right? Now, the debate goes that sometime between the 2nd century and the 11th century. 800 years or something. We don't know. It's very difficult to figure out when this book was written down. I tend to agree with Zahi Weiss, who I'll have his name in his book in the recommended readings at the end of the lecture tonight. I tend to agree with Zahi Weiss. It was produced in the 7th century, maybe the 8th century, but it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this class. So we're not going to get into the weeds about when it was written down. However, you may be interested in when it was published. Here on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the first edition of the Sefer Yetzirah published in Mantua, I think it was 1562. I could be wrong about that, but I think it was in 1562 that was published in Mantua. But we have a first edition copy here. One of these copies, by the way, sells for about $60,000. So if you have $60,000 lying around, you want to buy me a gift, feel free to pick me up a copy of the Mantua edition of the Sefer Yetzirah. So, what is the Sefer Yetzirah? As I said, right, it's a book describing how God made the world. Now, what's also important about the Sefer Yetzirah is it is the first time we hear the word Sephirot. Now, this is a word that, for folks familiar with Kabbalah, this is a word you probably haven't heard before, right? Sephirot is one of these words that is a mainstay in the world of Kabbalah. Now, there are 2 things that are important about this word Sephirot. The first thing that's important about this word is that no one knows what it means, right? The root of the word, the shortish of the word is SFR, which in typical language Hebrew means to count, right? It just means to count. Now, if you want to make a noun out of that, right? Typically the noun would be mispar, and mispar actually does mean number. That's the Hebrew word for number. Mispar, misparim, right? It's a word for number. Well, the writer of this text doesn't go that route. They invent a new word that we've never seen before, and that new word they invent is Sephirot. Now, what they do is they take the word sphira and they add an ot to it, a feminine plural ending, and so we know it's in plural. What makes this word even more weird is that it's always accompanied in the Sefer Yetzirah with the term belima, the adjective belima. Now, the word belima only occurs once in the entire Hebrew Bible. It's a lapax legimenon, which means it only occurs once. And it's weird. Well, we know that beli, right, means without, and ma means what. And so it seems to mean without what. Now, what we have is a word made up, Sephirot, which kind of means number, and without what. So literally we can translate it as number without what. Now, if you put that into the actual text, it makes no sense. Whatever the author's trying to do here, whatever they're trying to describe, a literal reading of it doesn't make sense. So, what are the Sephirot Belima? What do we mean by the Sephirot the first time they appear in all of Jewish literature and all the history of Jewish mysticism? Well, the one thing that we know from Sefer Yetzirah is they are not divine emanations. Now, I know that the folks who are familiar with some Kabbalah, right? You've seen the tree of life, right? With the dots, right? And God goes da-da-da-da from Keter to Hokla, Bina, da-da-da-da, now Malchut, right? 10 things. We'll get you that later, right? And that's the tree of life. Those are the Sephirot. Well, in the Sefer Yetzirah, it's not that. whatever it is. It's not that. They are not divine emanations. We'll get there tonight. In a minute. They're not that. What are they? No one knows. No one knows. The going guess, and I say guess, right? Because I really do mean guess. The going guess is that this is being influenced by Neo-Pythagoreanism, right? Neo-Pythagoreanism. Remember, Neo-Pythagoreanism, mouthful, is all about this number stuff, right? Remember, it's all about number being a reality. Well, one of the things we know about Pythagoreanism is that one of their sacred symbols was this thing called the tetrachus. You're seeing it on the screen here to the left. The idea of the tetrachus, right, is the idea that from one monad can give rise to two monads, right, plus, right? So these 2 plus 1 give rise to 3, and these 3 plus 1 give rise to 4. If you add all of it together, right, you get a base 10 counting system. And from a base 10 counting system, you have basically the origins of the number system, and then from there you have the origins of arithmetic, etc., etc. It's a geometric way of describing how numericality itself comes into existence. Now, I know that sounds really abstract. That's because it's really abstract, right? But we know this from the Pythagorean world, right? They also thought there were 10 of these, right? There are 10 of these tetrachus, right? The tetrachus was a 10-node system. Well, guess what we know about the Sefer Belima? There are 10. And the text is really clear in the Sefer Yetzirah. 10, not 9, 10, not 11. Exactly 10. I think, that what these Sephirot mean are the basic structure of a decimal counting system. That what we have here is a decimal counting system. Why? Right? Because the symbol of 10 represents completeness in the Pythagorean system. And 2, the Sephirot are also always described in relationship to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So for the Sefer Yetzirah, the world's created by 2 things. 3 things. God, right? Using the 10 Sephirot and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, combine them together, creates everything else. So you have, well, you imagine it, right? What do you have? You have all the numbers, all the letters, combine all the numbers and letters together, and you get a universe. One can imagine that the 10 Sephirot are the 10 countable things of the base 10 system of counting, plus the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. They are the palette by which God painted the world into existence. So in Sefer Yetzirah, they are not emanations of God. They are numerical structures, which when combined with the alphabet, are the substructure of reality. Language and math. Right? I think that's what's going on with Sefer Yetzirah. Now, if you go ask someone else, they'll give you another story. They'll give you a story. Right? I think that's what's going on. And I think that I base that upon, if you read other Neo-Pythagorean literature, they make the exact same argument. Right? So I think that's what's going on here. Now, what we get in Sefer Yetzirah is a description of several successive stages the universe went through, right? Just like we tell the story now, right? We have the Big Bang, the period of inflation, right? And then we have the world that we have it now, and eventually we'll have the black hole period and proton decay or whatever. Right? There are successive stages of the universe. Sefer Yetzirah also describes successive stages of the universe, how they come into being. Now we can't get into the weeds of all that tonight. We just don't have enough time to do all of that. We could spend an entire 8 weeks just on Sefer Yetzirah. But what's really important is that the mature part of the universe, right? The mature part of the Olam is governed by what the Sefer Yetzirah calls Ketzivot. Ketzivot are limits, right? Limits, they're extremities. Again, that, by the way, limits, extremities, is Pythagorean language. They're translating this Pythagorean language, in my opinion, into Hebrew. And Ketzivot are these kind of limits. Now, what do those limits look like, right? Well, there are fundamentally 3 dimensions, right? 3 dimensions. Well, I say 3 dimensions, right? Actually, like 6 dimensions, but so they are, right? So you have 2 dimensions of time, beginning and ending. We have 2 dimensions of space, right? Or 2 dimensions of, so 2 dimensions of time, 2 dimensions of space, above and below, and those include the 4 cardinal directions. So above and below, right, are the cardinal directions, and then in those they split off into the other directions. And then along with the two dimensions of time, both beginning and ending, and the two dimensions of space, there are also two moral dimensions, right? Good and evil. This is a pretty interesting way of thinking about reality for this time period. And again, I think that someone with a background in physics, like Al, can appreciate, right? That they're already imagining reality as having dimensionality. There are these mathematical ways of understanding the nature of reality that are describable abstractly as what we might call dimensions, what they call kesibot, or limits, or extremities. This is followed by a very intense and very somewhat strange analysis, and yet still scientific, of the Hebrew alphabet itself, in which the writer of this text groups Hebrew letters into three groups based on the articulation of the points of the mouth. So when you make a mem sound, it's a ma. It's using your lips, labials, right? When you make a dalet sound, it's a da, dentals. When you make an aleph sound, right, an ayin sound, right, those are gutturals, right? Those are articulated at different points. And so it's a kind of quasi-primitive, right? When I say primitive, I don't mean backwards, but I mean ancient form of linguistic analysis, right? So they're analyzing language in terms of where these things get articulated in the face, in the mouth. And then finally what happens is the letters are all set into a correspondence. And the way that the writer of Sefer Yetzirah imagines the cosmos, right, or reality, is it really has three layers. There's the Olam, right, the whole big Megillah, right? There's time. Time is the movement of the Olam, right? And there's the human being. And the human being is the center of it, right? Because they are something that exists, and they are moving through time. And so the human being, the nefesh, the soul, right, is the nexus of the cosmos and time, right? And so they understand that. So what you get in the Sefer Yetzirah is a very involved system in which letters are assigned to members of the zodiac, right? Shana, time, right? And then also letters are combined to describe the cosmos, right? Various parts of the cosmos, and also describe various parts of your body. So your liver, your heart, your head, your eyes are set into correspondence with the various letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Because again, God spoke the world into being, and when God said ayin, right? Folks know this, right? The word ayin. Ayin is a Hebrew letter, and guess what ayin means? Eyes, right? God's not joshing around here, folks. When God said ayin, eyes came into existence. And what a sight sees, he's like, right? So we get this system of correspondence. So the Sefer Yetzirah is a very rigorous, scientific, philosophical, metaphysical analysis of how reality came into being. There have been several different periods of time. I just want to talk a little bit about how those periods of time have worked themselves out, right? So we have a few different periods of time in the development of Sefer Yetzirah, right? The earliest period of time is when it developed. And the truth of the matter is, we don't know anything about that time. We don't know exactly when and how it was developed. We think it was probably in kind of a Gnostic, theurgical, magical Greek, Syriac world, but it's anyone's guess. The first time we see the Sefer Yetzirah emerge is in philosophical scientific commentaries in the 10th century, right? So the 10th through the 12th century, the leading Jewish minds at the time spent time writing commentaries on Sefer Yetzirah. And they did it to try to show how this accurately describes the fundamental structure of reality. Now, again, when the Sadia Gaon, just to give an example, right? The Sadia Gaon writes a commentary on this. If the Sadia Gaon, the leading authority in all of the Jewish world at the time, feels the need to write a commentary on this, well, by God, that's spiritual, right? If he takes it seriously, you bet your ass you're going to take it seriously, right? And it's not just him. It's Danilo, it's all kinds of people. Barzilai, lots of people. So we have these scientific commentaries of the 10th through the 12th century. And then the book becomes magicalized. Because if it describes how God made the world, and if righteous people can make their own worlds, then this might be a roadmap to making our own stuff. And so it enters into its magical period, specifically in Europe with the Ashkenaz in the 11th and 13th century. right? And then eventually it's synthesized into the Kabbalah in the 13th century, and eventually it makes its way into modernity. We'll get into a little bit more of this other, more recent stuff in a bit. Now, of course, the Sefer Yetzirah is most heavily associated at the level of magic with the golem. I'm sure most folks here have heard of the golem. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the golem. But the golem, of course, is an artificial humanoid made from clay animated by magical means, specifically by techniques found in the Sefer Yetzirah. The earliest descriptions for the production of a golem are found primarily in the 12th century in the commentary on the Sefer Yetzirah written by Eliezer Verms, a German Ashkenazi rabbi. And he writes how to create a golem using various kinds of magical techniques, meditation techniques primarily, combining letters with vowels over and over and over again in a form of mystical meditation. And one can transform clay into a human being through these mystical meditations. And so the golem becomes this sort of artificial hero. By the way, the word golem actually does appear in the Hebrew Bible once, I think, to describe an unformed fetus. It's actually sort of the word for fetus in the Hebrew Bible. It's an entity that's not quite human and not quite not human. It's somewhere in between. That's why, by the way, in the Hebrew Bible, that if you kill someone, you're subject to the death penalty. But if in the middle of a fight, a man hits a woman who's pregnant and it calls her a miscarry, he's not subject to the death penalty because the thing inside her is a golem, not a person. Right? So the rabbis are actually very clear about what's a person and what's not. For them, unborn people, right, unborn entities are golems, not people. That's why there's no death penalty case in that matter. Which is something I think is weird. I don't know why more fundamentalist Christians and people don't really. Yeah, they're all about reading the Bible. Read the damn thing. Yeah, be about it. Don't talk about it. Be about it. Read the damn thing. So at any rate, the golem, right, is how this idea came about, right? Because if God can make things and I can make things, well, I can use speech to make things too. And the golem becomes the quintessential legend for this. Now, you probably heard the golem of Prague, just as a myth-busting thing to ruin your night. The golem of Prague was invented by a 19th century German writer, non-Jewish German writer, and ascribed the whole idea to the Maharal of Prague. The Maharal of Prague never made a golem. There was no golem legends prior to the 19th century in Prague. Now, don't go shouting that very loudly if you go to Prague because they'll throw you out of a window. That's, Prague hospitality. Because they make a lot of money on tourism on the whole golem thing. But the Maharal of Prague never made a golem. Never was interested in golems. If you read the Maharal of Prague's actual writings, he would have been very opposed to things like that. He was a pretty 10 and 2 by the book kind of legalist, actually. So that entire legend was invented in some ways by whole cloth. Although the Golem movie is very important, what's also interesting about the Golem movie, I'll just mention here just briefly, is that the Golem movie as we have it is actually a prequel. It's a prequel. The original Golem movie and the sequel have both been lost. They're lost movies, sadly. So if you ever go see the Golem movie that we have is a prequel to a movie that's been lost. And the sequel, we also know was made, has all been lost due to two of these movies that, a lot of, as you may know, a lot of film back in the day was printed on things like nitrocellulose or whatever, like really, really combustible film. And, even a spark could burn the whole thing down. And so a lot of these movies were lost. So if you ever see the Golem, just know that you're watching a prequel to a movie that was very popular that's been lost now. But the invention of an artificial humanoid, and further, the last thing I'll say about Sefer Yetzirah is that dozens of commentaries on this little book have been written in the century since it's been written. Sefer Yetzirah is probably the single most commented book after the Bible and the I should be careful what I say about that. There are dozens of commentaries. I will say that on Sefer Yetzirah, and Standard Edition has at least 12 commentaries attached to it. And so the Sefer Yetzirah in the traditional Jewish world is a highly, highly, highly commented upon book, and it is in fact, to this day, I think would say it is a canonical book of Jewish scripture. As we get into Europe, right? As we get into Europe, in the world of the Ashkenaz, and we're going to run a little over tonight, but I think it's okay. I won't try to go too far over. As we get into Europe, we get into the world of the Ashkenaz. We've been in the Middle East for a while, right? We've been in ancient Israel, ancient Palestine. We've been in ancient Egypt. We've been in ancient Mesopotamia. the focus begins to shift beginning in the period of the 10th and 11th centuries. That has a lot to do with what's going on in the Middle East with things like the Mongol invasions and some kind of crackdowns, at least at some level, in terms of things get a little stricter in the Islamic world. And so the intellectual centers begin to shift to traditional Jewish parts of the world in Europe, Ashkenaz being one of them. Now, people have these bizarre ideas that all of European Jews are descendants of Khazars that converted in the 9th century or something, and that all European Jews are not really Jews. There's all that kind of bizarre anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Jews have been in Europe for thousands of years, right? Because Jews have been traveling with the Romans the entire time, and wherever the Romans established trade places, Jews went. Like lots of people went, Greeks went, right? People forget that Massalia, Marseille, on the very south coast of France, was a Greek colony, right? Set there to do trade. So trade and movement of populations happened all through the Roman world. People forget that one of the capitals of the Roman Empire was Trier in Germany, right? That blows people's mind, but Constantine the Great was born in Trier, in what is now Germany, the birthplace of Karl Marx, of all people. So Jews have been in Europe for centuries. Now, what goes on, right, is that beginning in this period, right, Jews come to the forefront of learning and other kinds of things, not just trade. And in Ashkenaz, around the turn of the millennium, maybe a couple hundred years after the turn of the millennium of 1000 Common Era, we have a very weird esoteric theology developed that is called the unique cherub circle. And the unique cherub circle introduced the idea that God and the world can't be directly connected. Why? Well, it's simple philosophy. If God is infinite and the world is finite, then the distance between the infinite and the finite is always going to be infinite. That's a theological problem. So what do? You need something to link the worlds. You need a bridge, something that's quasi-finite and something that's trying to find the quasi-infinite. And what they introduced was the idea of Ha'atzalah, right? Ha'atzalah, that God flows out of God's self, and somehow the flowing out of God's self bridges the gap between the infinite God and the finite world. And the thing that bridges the gap for this group of people was a thing called the unique cherub, right? The cherub is a kind of angel, as you probably know. And this unique cherub bore the glory of God. That God's glory had a hidden inner glory, right? Right? It's like imagine the inside of the sun, right? The inside of the sun is full of like energy and intensity, but we never see it. What do we see in the sun? We see the outside layer, right? We see the outer glory. And the outer glory, right, of God, the outer kavod, flows out and becomes a kind of special angel, a unique cherub. And that special angel is an atzalah, is an emanation of flowing out of God, right? And that bridges the gap between the infinite and the finite with the unique cherub in the middle. Now, we don't know much about this group, right? This is a very strange group of rabbis there in Ashkenaz, in Germany, and we're still doing research about them. But it seems like they've been introduced to the idea of Neoplatonism. And we'll talk about Neoplatonism next time, right? We'll talk about it at length. Now, what ends up happening is that infused with this idea of Ha'atzalah, of emanation, the Sefer Yetzirah gets fused to it. So the idea is, well, it can't just be one thing, right? Maybe it's 10. Maybe there are 10 things standing between the infinite, utter transcendent God and us. And maybe between those things, there are 10 things. Because Sefer Yetzirah says there are 10. 10 Sephirot Belimah, right? So maybe the ladder has 10 rungs. Maybe the ladder has 10 rungs. And that idea of the ladder having 10 rungs is taken up in the first Kabbalistic text in history, the Sefer Bahir. This is the first text of Kabbalah. If you want to start studying Kabbalah, this is the text you start with, the Sefer Bahir. This is the first printed version you see here on the left-hand side. This is a midrash, right? Midrashim are texts in which the Bible is used as a stepping stone, or diving board, better, right, to riff, right? Like, folks, you like jazz, right? If you like jazz, right? One of the things that you go to a jazz show, right? Coltrane might start a riff, right? And then Monk might pick up, right? With the drums. And then someone else is going to pick up, right? And then they're going to riff. And they're going to riff, and they're going to riff, and they're a variation of theme, right? If you want to think about what Midrash is Jewish jazz. It's taking a riff and going with it, right? Commenting on it, legends, weird stuff, strange ideas, right? Don't read this, read that. Turn the letters around backwards, read them that way, right? It's riffing, right? It's improvisation on these ideas. Midrash is Jewish jazz, right? So what we get in the Sefer Bahir is a work of Jewish jazz, Midrash, was very popular in the Middle Ages, right? But this Jewish Midrash is really interesting for a couple of reasons. One is because it's ascribed to a first century Jewish scholar, Nehunya ben Akana. Now, Nehunya ben Akana didn't write this, but it's ascribed to him to kind of give it a little gravitas. Further, what's also really important about this is it's very clear that whoever wrote this is doing some really, really interesting theological, philosophical mysticism. They're riffing on this material, on the Bible, in a way we've never seen before. Now, did they make it all up? Were they part of a larger tradition? Was there a community of people doing this? And this is just the one work that survived? We don't know, right? But what we do know is this text introduces the core concepts that become the foundation for the Kabbalah as we know it. Now, these midrashim inside of, there are 200 of these inside of the Sefer Bahir. They are not united in any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the story goes right is that the writer must have written them all down, and then the story is they threw them into the air, and every time they landed, that's how they got edited together. The editing seemed random, right? Now, there are passages that do seem contiguous, and they kind of titter off into seemingly random commentaries. But there are a couple things that are very crucially important about Sefer Bahir. The first thing that's really crucially important is Sefer Bahir combines Sefer Yetzirah in the unit cherub circle. The Sefer Bahir says there are emanations of God, right? There's I've heard folks ever like boiled milk, right? Or like, have you ever seen like go to a wedding where someone's pouring champagne over like one glass, and one glass it's on like two glasses, and two glasses on four glasses, right? They're pouring a champagne, the champagne flows down all the glasses. Well, imagine like pouring a champagne, the bottle never got empty, right? That's what the Sefer are. It's God pouring God's self out, but because God is infinite, God never becomes empty, and the world becomes full, right? That's what the emanations are. So Sefer Bahir does two really important things in this respect. It combines the 10 Sephirot of the Sefer Yetzirah with the idea of emanations, and it says, yes, God emanated in 10 forms, distinct forms. There are 10 distinct emanations, and it discusses them at length. Now, Kabbalah, as you probably know it, because everyone knows it, if there is nothing else that makes Kabbalah, it's that. There are 10 emanations. They relate to each other. There are various aspects of God. God's mercy, God's judgment, God's glory, God's victory, God's beauty. Right? That's a core component of Kabbalah. We'll start getting into that stuff next time. Right? So that's the one thing, very important thing that Sefer Bahir does. It combines those two ideas into one system for the first time. Secondly, right, what Sefer Bahir does is it introduces the idea that God has a feminine form, the Shekhinah, right? Now, the idea of the Shekhinah goes all the way back to the Talmud, right? But never does God have a feminine form. It's just that the word Shekhinah is feminine grammar-wise. But in the Bahir, the Shekhinah is described as a lady, almost always in the same kind of language being used to describe other women in the medieval period. She's actually described as a matronita, right? It's a Latin term that becomes an important term in medieval courtly lore. So God's presence in the world becomes feminized. Again, if you know nothing else about Kabbalah, you know that the Shekhinah is the feminine presence of God in the world. Lechadodi. Every time you've ever been to a Kabbalah Shabbat service, you've sung Lechadodi. It's all about welcoming the Shabbat bride, the Shabbat bride, the Shabbat bride, who is God's feminine form. This idea appears for the first time in the Sefer Bahir, right? And again, the language here is full of courtly language. We think this text is being written sometime in the early Middle Ages. Although there are people like Ronit Hermas who actually says it may have been written in Babylon. It's really hard for me to tell. Frankly, those folks are such brilliant scholars that I'm just going to defer to their ingenuity. What's also important about the descriptions of the Shekhinah in the Sefer Bahir is that she's almost always described in these really weird terms as an exile, that she came from the land of light, or that she's a princess from a faraway land. And scholars, at least of an earlier generation, and I think even some scholars now, and maybe even me, detect that in Gnostic literature, we can talk maybe a little bit more about Gnostic literature in the Q&A afterwards. There's an idea in Gnostic literature, this is a form of heterodox religion that existed back in the ancient classical world, where there's the incarnation of Sophia, of wisdom, and she makes a mistake. And she creates this hideous ruler god who creates our physical world, and our physical world is a trap, right? But she's the incarnation of light and brilliance and wisdom, right? And she's always described as being from another world, right? And some people think, right, so especially in earlier generation of scholarship, maybe even some folks now, think that the Sefer Bahir may continue forth a tradition or drag into the Middle Ages some Gnostic ideas. We can talk more about those later if folks are interested in those Gnostic ideas. But there seems to be some kind of quasi-Gnostic character to the Shekhinah as she appears in the Sefer Bahir. Last couple things I'll say about the Sefer Bahir as we wrap up for the night is, one, the Sefer Bahir describes divine power as a kind of tree, right? A kind of fullness. Now that tree language is going to be obviously very important, because if you've ever studied Kabbalah, the one thing you'll know is that the Sephirot are often arrayed in what's called the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, and that tree language, right? The God is a kind of divine tree, also appears in Sefer Bahir. And it describes God as having roots and limbs and buds and flowers and leaves and things. There's kind of a fullness to God, which also seems to maybe have its origins in very ancient Gnostic schools of thought. Also, and this will be important as we get later on into Kabbalah proper, is that for the Sefer Bahir, evil seems to have a life of its own. Now, in traditional Judaism and in traditional Christianity, evil thought of as a pervasive, right? Augustine, I'll just give an example from Christian tradition, right? Augustine says that evil isn't a thing in itself, right? Evil is a lack of something. It's a lack of God's grace. In the same way that heat is a thing, but cold isn't. Darkness is not a thing, light is. Darkness is just a term we use for the absence of light. Cold is just a term we use for the absence of heat. Evil is just a term we use for the absence of God. Well, ancient Gnostics believed that evil was very real. It had its own existence. And there are sections in the Sefer Bahir that say, yeah, evil existed on its own. It was out there all along. God kind of tamed it, but not quite. And what we'll see when we get into Proto-Kabbalah next time is that evil is going to be one of the overwhelmingly interesting things in the part of the Kabbalah. Where did evil come from? Because, as you might imagine, Jews living in Europe in the 13th century are going to deal with a lot of evil. And they're going to be very interested in where evil comes from. And the image that the traditional Kabbalists will use is the very image you're seeing here on the left. That evil is the sparks thrown off the anvil as God created the world. Right? Just as when you create a knife, you have to pound the steel. As you pound the steel, it throws off dross. Well, when God made the world, it threw off dross. and that dross for the early Kabbalists is evil. And it's always been here. It's always been here. And that image of the blacksmith hammering at the anvil will be an image we'll see repeatedly when we get into Kabbalah. Well, folks, we are there. We have now crossed the threshold from the Merkabah Hechalot world. We are now into the world of what I call the Proto-Kabbalah. Now, what I want to just reinforce as we wrap up for the night is that Kabbalah was not born all at once. As you can see, these ideas are developing. We have the Sephirot from the Sefer Yetzirah. We have the emanation sequence from the unique cherub circle. We have it synthesized by the Sefer Bahir. We're going to see that later text further synthesize ideas from the Sefer Bahir. Kabbalah is a development. It's a development. So it's really important to understand that when people talk about the Kabbalah, they're not quite right. What we should talk about is Kabbalistic development and then schools of Kabbalah. Right? Now we'll see, we'll get into this later on as we get into Kabbalah, we'll see this a lot more clearly. Well, finally, I just want to point to some additional reading. I know that folks love to do, folks like to get into this stuff, and I know that literature on the Kabbalah can be a mire, right? It can either be really, really technically sophisticated, and you have to learn to read 15 languages to figure this stuff out, or it can be like a lot of hooey stuff that people just make up out of their mind. But these texts are all really solid. I mentioned earlier, right, that Zahid Weiss, I think for me, one of the best arguments for the early history and development of the Kabbalah. So if you really want to get into the weeds of how Kabbalah, about Sefer Yetzirah, rather, how Sefer Yetzirah developed, I think Zahid Weiss has a really great argument, in my opinion. The Peter Heyman text is a standard edition now, critical edition of the Kabbalah. You get into ILL now, it costs like $800. So you're not going to get it from a university library, but it is a standard analysis of the Sefer Yetzirah. The Aryeh Kaplan, which is a standard one you get on Amazon. It's okay. He analyzes the Sefer Yetzirah from a Lurianic Kabbalistic perspective, which isn't bad or anything, but I think it distorts the text in a way that I find to be confusing, especially to people who've never encountered the text before. In the standard religious version of the Sefer Yetzirah, the best religious version, if you want to read a religious version with a bunch of commentaries, is the Sefer Yetzirah HaShalem, that's published by Harav Moshe Suriel. You can get that I can give folks a link if you want to buy that, but you'll need to be able to read Hebrew and stuff for that one. It's only in Hebrew, so if you want the copy of that one, I can send you a link to it if you like. And for Sefer Bahir, Joseph Don has a really great book on both the early Kabbalah and the unique cherub circle. That unique cherub circle book also is an ILO. It's very expensive. And we'll get to the books of contemplation here next week. And also, Aryeh Kaplan has a nice version of the Sefer Bahir. That, again, comes with the same caveats, right? He's a Lurianic Kabbalist, and he brings a specific Lurianic interpretation to the text that, again, it can be confusing. I'm not opposed to Kabbalists doing Kabbalah. I mean, Kabbalists should do Kabbalah. That's their bag. But I think that often when beginner people pick it up, it's like, oh, this is what it means. I'm like, yeah, no, it's not quite that. It's more complicated than that. So again, I don't want to fault a Kabbalist for being a Kabbalist, but it's not academic, right? It's not an academic text. But it is easily accessible and widely available online. Well, folks, next week we turn to the early Kabbalah. We're going to be looking at some developments in southern France and Spain. We're going to be looking at how the earliest strata of Kabbalah developed. And then after that, we turn to the most monumental text in all of Jewish mystical history. That's going to be the Sefer Zohar, right? The book of illumination. My child is named Zohar. If you want to get an idea about how important this book is to me and mine, I got a kid named Zohar. So I take it pretty seriously. And so we'll get to the Sefer Zohar the time after next. But next time we'll be dealing with developments, philosophical, mystical developments in the earliest stages of Kabbalah in Europe, in the very earliest stages of Kabbalah at all. So we'll turn to the early Proto-Kabbalah next time. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me as I explore the garden that is Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Again, if you'd like to support my work of providing accessible, free, and scholarly content on topics like Kabbalah, alchemy, and the occult, along with magic, hermetic philosophy, consider supporting my work on Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.
You're fired. Go fuck yourself.